Today's question is, people who work for the super rich, what have you seen? I won't go into details, but my parents have a net worth of over 100 million, and they were rich throughout my childhood. They hid this from us when we were kids, as both came from fairly poor working-class families and were rightly worried that if we knew or if they splurged on things for us, we would become useless and entitled rich kids. It worked well, and I'm grateful that we grew up living relatively modestly. We had everything we needed and were happy, healthy, and a very close family. My dad always had us working on projects at home on weekends, teaching us to do many things ourselves. I've met some of my dad's wealthy colleagues' children and have seen how pathetically incapable they are, and I can only feel that their parents did them a great disservice. It also helped that we didn't appear to have much money, because my wife didn't realize it until we were already married, and I was 100% a penniless nobody barely able to afford college. My parents helped me a bit, which was extremely fortunate, but they were adamant that I work full-time to pay for tuition and rent when we met. So I can say with certainty she didn't marry me for the apparent wealth of my family. She told me she thought I was poor because my family never had cable TV, and I had no idea what she was talking about when she referenced childhood memories of Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network shows from the 90s. At home, we didn't really watch much TV. Anyway, I was exposed to a lot of people considered super rich when I was a kid. Honestly, I should have put two and two together after meeting all these people my dad worked closely with who had houses 5 times the size of ours, with all these extravagant amenities. But I never really did. They were just a kind of odd novelty we occasionally interacted with. One of them was a close colleague and friend of my dad's, really a mentor to him throughout his career. He was really a very nice man, a bit intense, but not in a negative way. He had a 14-room mansion on a 10-acre property. He had a butler and chef and a maid living in his house, which I found amazing. I remember walking through his house while he gave us a tour and mentioned he had a big screen and Tybo in every room. This was probably around 2004 to 2005 when having a Tybo was a big luxury. I remember thinking at the time how excessive that was. His garage housed about 10 cars, none of which were probably worth less than $100K. He was telling my dad he was going to take a trip to Germany that fall to personally tour some Mercedes-Benz factory and choose the custom options for some outrageously expensive sports car that they would then ship to the United States. I remember noting that this guy's master bathroom was larger than my parents' and brother's rooms combined. I saw someone else mention disuse and noted it in his house. He had a separate guest house on his property that was slightly larger than our house. This guy was around 60 years old at the time, so he was much older than my dad, and he must have had a net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars. He had this huge mansion, a big property, all these things. He and his wife lived there alone. They had no children. He invested his time and money in philanthropic efforts with kids, and I never tried to delve into his reasons for not having a family. As far as I knew, maybe they couldn't. I just remember thinking it was sad to have all that space, all those things, and not really have anyone to fill the space and share it with. There was another guy my dad worked with for years. They were on the same salary level for a long time, but I didn't know him until it was already revealed how much money my parents had. My dad left his company after 30 years and started a separate business. He asked this guy to come along and help him get it started, and the guy said he really wanted to, but my dad probably couldn't afford him. My dad said, "What are you talking about? We'll be 50-50 owners of a growing company," and the guy said if he didn't get a salary of at least $1 million a year, he would have to sell all his properties or go bankrupt. This guy had a mansion in our area, a beach house in North Carolina, another beach house in Florida, a condo in San Diego, a speedboat here, a yacht there. He also had about 10 cars, and his wife and 2 kids had absolutely extravagant tastes. Basically, between his various mortgages, maintaining his houses, and his ridiculous lifestyle where no one cared about the value of their money, they were spending over $1 million a year. And he had this huge mansion, a large property, all these things. He and his wife lived there alone. They had no children. He invested his time and money in philanthropic efforts with children, and I never tried to delve into his reasons for not having a family. As far as I knew, maybe they couldn't. I just remember thinking it was sad to have all that space, all those things, and not really have anyone to fill the space and share it with. There was another guy my dad worked with for years. They were on the same salary level for a long time, but I didn't know him until it had already been revealed how much money my parents had. My dad left his company after 30 years and started a separate business. He asked this guy to come along and help him get it started, and the guy said he really wanted to, but my dad probably couldn't afford him. My dad said, "What are you talking about? We'll be 50-50 owners of a growing company." And the guy said if he didn't get a salary of at least $1 million a year, he would have to sell all his properties or go bankrupt. This guy had a mansion in our area, a beach house in North Carolina, another beach house in Florida, a condo in San Diego, a speedboat here, a yacht there. He also had about 10 cars, and his wife and 2 kids had absolutely extravagant tastes. Basically, between his various mortgages, maintaining his houses, and his ridiculous lifestyle where no one cared about the value of their money, they were spending over $1 million a year. My dad was very surprised by this. In fact, we have met many people through his work over the years who should be rich and give the impression of being very wealthy, but are up to their necks in debt. And despite earning the kind of money the average person could only dream of, they still live paycheck to paycheck with the specter of bankruptcy always looming over their heads. Only in their case, it's ridiculous because they're not on the brink of economic disaster for anything other than their own insane spending habits and living well beyond any reasonable means. Only one friend of my dad from his old business was exactly like him. This guy drove a beat-up 1985 Crown Vic. This was around 2008. He had a normal house, filled with normal things and family heirlooms. If you met him at the grocery store, he would simply seem like a lower middle-class working guy. Even talking to him was different. He didn't have that weird air of pomp or whatever, just a very normal guy. I remember going with him, my dad, and my brother to a baseball game. He had gotten tickets, and they were as far back as you could get. He was excited to be at a baseball game, a rare luxury. And I remember the guy commenting on how great it was that you could still get baseball tickets for like $10 and what a good deal it was. Oh, this guy could have had a luxury box at that stadium if he wanted, but I didn't realize that until later, and it made it even more amusing. I'll change some details to protect those involved, but I used to give guitar lessons in a very wealthy area, and the company I worked for had many famous and/or ridiculously rich clients. I saw rivers inside houses, elevators, waterfalls, live-in chefs, garages for 40 cars, fully automated mansions that could change the season inside, etc. What struck me the most was the boredom of humanity. For example, a guy I became friends with had 17 off-road vehicles, a house bigger than his Lakers star neighbors and his Bulls star neighbors for that matter, and traveled to different extreme sports competitions every weekend. But when he came for the lesson, he just wanted to talk about Nirvana, watch TV, and attend concerts. The second thing that struck me was that the ratio of cool people to problematic people seemed relatively the same among the super rich and the normies. For example, there was a guy who wanted lessons with his very young son to connect with him, but he only lasted 3 minutes in each lesson before having to take an important call or run to an emergency board meeting. You could see the kid was in a huge playground of a mansion, but he was devastated. However, I also gave lessons to a family where the parents were 2 high-level lawyers, one of whom is now running for Congress, and they were absolutely amazing with those kids. Always attentive, they would leave calls with famous clients to fix a tricycle wheel, lovingly enforce homework rules, etc. Cool people. That was about the same ratio among my middle-class clients and my poor clients. The last thing that stood out as the only really obvious advantage of being rich was people's physical appearance. Overall, almost everyone was very attractive at any age, and most without surgery. It's really amazing what the body can do when you can always feed it with healthy meals, have resident chefs, exercise whenever you want in various ways without leaving home, have gyms in the mansion, pools with multi-level indoor and outdoor waterfalls, week-long ski trips, personal trainers, etc. And the lack of daily constant mental stress. I'm not saying they didn't have stress or didn't work hard, but most didn't have that existential stress about what might happen if they got fired for not working the extra Saturday. Existential stress about what might happen if they got fired for not working the extra Saturday, or the stress of a boss breathing down your neck when you're in a dead-end job just waiting for a decent paycheck. There's something to be said about the mental benefit of hope and joy and inner calm, and unfortunately, money helps with those things. So I also saw a big health benefit in people with a lot of money. And lastly, I don't think any of these people made themselves. This kind of wealth is not achieved just by working hard and climbing the corporate ladder using only your own resources. This kind of money is generational wealth with decades-old investment accounts established by ancestors. I'm not saying they didn't work hard, but turning $100 into $1,000 and turning $100 million into $110 million are two very different things. And the latter is undeniably easier both from a percentage and opportunity standpoint. I worked in retail sales, J. Crew, on the main street of a super-rich town. A woman took off her diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch and somehow forgot it in the fitting room. I found it and the manager had no idea what to do with it. We had a lost-and-found drawer, but it was full of sunglasses and random stuff. It wasn't really safe for a $500,000 watch. So he decided to keep it in the store safe, normally only used for cash. When no one came the next day to claim it, I called the company, which took forever, gave them the serial number, and they called the owner to tell her where to pick it up. They gave me the owner's name to verify that it was her when she came. The next day, a woman comes in asking for the watch. I ask for ID to verify, she gives it to me, and behold, it's not the owner. But she explains that she is the housekeeper of the owner and that they sent her to pick it up. My manager says I can't give her the watch and insists that it must be the owner with her ID who picks it up. I tell the housekeeper and she gets upset because she has many errands to run and doesn't want to call her boss. Eventually, she does and tells the owner that she must come herself with ID. But first, the owner tries to claim to be the owner on the phone and doesn't understand why that's not enough proof. The housekeeper goes to run other errands, and about 2 hours later, the owner arrives and has a tantrum asking why we had to bother her when it's clearly her watch. How are we supposed to know that? I have no idea, and she scolds me for wasting her time when I tell her I have to go get it from the safe. When I come back, I put on my customer service smile and tell her I'm sorry that getting back her $500,000 watch was so difficult for her, but many other people tried to claim the watch was theirs, so we were just being careful. Actually, there was only one buyer who overheard us talking about the watch and jokingly said he would take it, but she didn't care and left grumbling. The same housekeeper comes back the next day and returns 7 cashmere sweaters that the lady bought all wrinkled in a ball. Apparently, the owner got too exasperated in our store and decided to buy the rest of the clothes without trying them on, and then forgot her watch. Buying a bunch of clothes without trying them on was common among the rich people, but usually they forgot or didn't care enough to make returns. Interestingly, it wasn't the weirdest incident, nannying for billionaires. At that time, they were among the 25 richest families in the world. However, every story I can think of seems so specific to them. As if billionaires were so ordinary. They are like people from different economic classes, and at the same time, they are all different from each other. But I will list a few things. There is a lot of child neglect. A lot of delegating your kids to paid care, and often the paid care is not that good. For example, once the nanny used to leave the baby alone sleeping in his crib for 15 minutes each morning while she took the toddler to daycare. Billionaires hire minimum wage workers who don't necessarily have training or passion for what they do. Once my child had the flu, and the mother asked me to take him to her home gym so he could be near her while she exercised on the treadmill. He was crying in my arms with a high fever, reaching out to her while she ran on the treadmill. I cradled him as best as I could. A few days later, I had the flu. The mother did not. The mother I worked for was very spoiled. Once, she bought a dress at a boutique about 5 blocks away. Did they have to alter it or something? I don't remember. But when it was ready, she wanted it delivered. The store only had one woman working, and she couldn't close the store to deliver the dress. The mother got very upset and argued with her for quite some time before finally sending me to pick it up. She often had tantrums. Also, she wasn't very bright. Like, she never seemed to understand simple logistics. She just wanted what she wanted when she wanted it. The father was spoiled in a different way. Everything was fun, fun, fun. He worked hard, but he was a bit mischievous. It was as if he had been raised to work hard and not expect anything he didn't earn. But he also liked to outsmart others. Once, when his son had diarrhea and he and his wife were trying to clean him up, he took the cleaning cloth to the laundry and rinsed it. Then he stayed there, turning the water on and off, pretending he was still rinsing it to avoid going back and helping clean the baby. He made the shushing gesture to me. But once we were in the limo on the way to the airport, and his young son asked him to repeat a story he had told him as a child. He said he didn't know which story he was referring to. The child started crying. I told the child, "Tell the story first, then he will tell it again." So the child managed to describe it enough for the father to know which story he meant. He said, "One day, when it was raining very hard, they forgot to pick me up from school so I could go home for lunch. I walked all the way home in the rain, had to wade through puddles, and it was windy and cold. And when I got home, I was all wet and shivering. They fed me, and I thought, now I don't have to go back to school because I've had a very difficult day. But after lunch, they sent me straight back to school. I'm sure they took him back, just so you know. The point was that they raised him not to feel sorry for himself and just get back to work." I spent time with his parents on vacation, and they were very much like that. They were cheerful people with a positive attitude who believed in hard work. Despite how spoiled they were in different ways, they did a lot of good things in the world. Lots of charity and volunteer work. They really changed the lives of thousands of people with the work they did. I think that's quite common among the rich. They can and often do make huge differences. They should pay taxes though. They are super politically involved. All the families I met had significant political influence. In fact, some of the family I worked for currently hold very high political positions. Wealth and politicians. Suicide in the family, someone who died long before I worked there. The mother said about her, everyone always told her how lucky she was. Sometimes she didn't feel lucky. That really struck me. I hate when people think the rich don't have problems. There are so many problems in the world that money can't solve. Money makes most problems much easier to manage, but it can also present its own problems. There was a person who was a recovering addict, and the parents I worked for were terrified that one of their children would become an addict. They were not permissive at all. Nanny died. She was taking the children from their country house to another house on the property. They were just driving on this private rural road without other cars or people, so they weren't wearing seatbelts. She turned around to yell at the kids to stop fighting or something and drove into a ditch at high speed. She was ejected from the car and died. The kids were in the middle of nowhere. They had to walk back to the house to get help. I think about that sometimes. I knew that nanny. She was foreign, and they met her when she worked for them in their home country. They hired her to come to the United States, and she had worked for them for years. She got engaged in the United States and was engaged when she died in her 20s. She came from a poor country all that way, only to die young. I think about what those kids must have felt, seeing her there and not being able to call for help. This was just before cell phones existed. I'm sure they loved her like a big sister. I just can't imagine having that memory forever. I remember her telling me so many times, "They just don't listen to me." They were super energetic kids and not always easy to care for. This was common among all the rich people I met. They never seemed to realize how much they were demanding of their staff, especially their childcare staff. That book called The Nanny Diaries? Another nanny from this family, and I talked about how incredibly accurate it was. The kids always had to be dressed right, in a good mood, doing the right thing, and kids are not like that. They blamed you if they were on the wrong track or inappropriate in any way. I used many psychological tricks to get the kids to cooperate, but I was often exhausted and burned out and sometimes not kind to the kids at all. Book called The Nanny Diaries? Another nanny from this family, and I talked about how incredibly accurate it was. The kids always had to be dressed right, in a good mood, doing the right thing, and kids are not like that. They blamed you if they were on the wrong track or inappropriate in any way. I used many psychological tricks to get the kids to cooperate, but I was often exhausted and burned out and sometimes not kind to the kids at all. Yet, it's just a bad situation to overstress the people in charge of your child's well-being. Some of them are really much smarter than average. One of the kids I cared for spoke in full sentences at 2 years old. Once, walking down the street, he heard a woman say something in Mandarin to a child. He asked me, "What does it mean?" He repeated the phrase perfectly phonetically. He was incredibly smart and apparently inherited that from a great-grandfather. He is now an adult and does a lot of environmental work. Do you know that phrase? If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Many rich people are really incredibly smart. Well, some are not, but it's pretty cool to see those who are. You think, oh, that makes sense. I work as a private chef in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut area for high net worth families like venture capitalists, CEOs, and sports team owners. Things like that. This is what I've seen. They don't raise their children. Each family has domestic staff, sometimes one for each child. The kids are not well adjusted, all attend private schools, have drivers, and don't understand how anything works. Once I had to explain to a child what a public school is. They shop differently than we do. When we go to the store, we buy what we need. A 12-pack of soda, just the paper towels or snacks we need. These families order everything and in large quantities. It's not a 12-pack of soda, it's entire cases. And everything is ordered and delivered. I've been in houses with floor-to-ceiling closets just for drinks. They never use the subway or public transport. They have a room dedicated only to cutlery and another just for serving trays. The amount of money they spend weekly on fresh flowers is obscene. They are beautiful, but wow. A dining table that costs $250,000. Elon Musk, not by choice. I was just at a dinner where I was working. They spend more money on kitchens they will never use than most people on a vehicle. I've worked in kitchens with stoves over $20,000 in private homes. The houses? Last summer, I worked for a family that has at least $75 million in 3 properties alone. It's absolutely wild. They often try to lowball you. Only a few times has a billionaire looked at my rate without trying to get me to accept less. I've been in a $40 million house in the Hamptons, listening to a woman try to negotiate my rate down. They eat much more simply than you might imagine. I've written extensive haute cuisine menus for private dinners only to have them ask for something as simple as steak, mashed potatoes, and broccoli. No exaggeration. This is a regular dish for one of my clients. So simple. They will give you all expenses paid trips just to not have to worry about cooking their own meals. I might be missing a few things, but this is what comes to mind first. I was a producer of major concerts for a decade, so I guess you could say I've worked for a lot of wealthy people. Now I'm quite removed from that environment as I've been working in health technology. Life is curious, but I have a book full of memories. I'll write some of the highlights. A rock band that still plays today but was very big in the 90s. The lead singer refused to sing or get on stage or do the sound check until we provided him with drugs. In a country known for its strict drug laws, we provided his needs. The show went on. A pop singer with a packed venue arrived an hour after the doors opened, and the crowd was about to tear the place apart. He did a mediocre show and ended 5 songs early. I had to threaten his manager with legal action to get him on stage. The artist did the minimum to avoid being sued. A pop icon refused to spend the night in the city where the concert was being held. We had to rent a luxury helicopter to take her to the airport, less than a mile from the venue. But the traffic due to her concert took a long time to get there, and then fly her and a group of her dancers to a beach resort for the night. 3 concerts that week. We did that every day. A billionaire held his son's first communion on a private island. The child wanted one of the most popular artists of the moment to sing for him. The island is private, and there is no public way to get there. We transported the team in helicopters and took the equipment, including lights, sound, and stage, to play a total of 5 songs. Artist X had on his list of demands that the room should contain a bowl filled only with red M and Ms. Artist Y had on his list of demands that the room should contain a bowl filled only with green M&Ms, and that the entire dressing room should be painted in a specific shade of blue with white leather furniture from a specific brand. Artist Zeta had on his list of demands that he wanted arcade games, pinball machines, and pepperoni pizza in his dressing room, which had to be large enough to accommodate 25 people. Artist A had his show outfits specially made by Versace and wore them only once. We had a warehouse full of used suits that no one could wear because they were custom made and tailored. The same artist's drummer had a sponsorship deal with a major drum company. The company sent him a beautiful, unique drum set. The artist refused to let him use it because he didn't like the color. The drummer quit and the drum set was abandoned in the same warehouse. I saw it decades later, still there collecting dust. This was actually very sweet. He's an English artist whose music I really like. I was called on the radio and told there had been an accident in the dressing room an hour before the doors opened. I ran with my staff and the paramedics. The accident was that a child had vomited and the artist himself was requesting a mop and a bucket. It turned out they were celebrating the birthday of one of his musician's children, and the child had too much fun jumping around. I offered to send my cleaning team. He declined. He cleaned it up himself. Not long ago, I worked with a group of people who managed the finances and estates, known as family office, of ultra-high net worth individuals in Greenwich. In this case, it means people who had investable assets exceeding $10 billion. And that doesn't just mean they have a total net worth of over $10 billion, but that they also have an additional amount of liquid assets immediately available for investment that exceeds $10 billion. I worked very closely with a family that owns most of one of the largest cities in the United States. That is, they generally decide who will be the mayor and who will be other elected officials through direct and indirect funding and the backing of various groups. This goes beyond money to say screw you. This is screw everyone who isn't us. This is we can use the mafia to kill you if you cross us, or just if we feel like it because they owe us favors. This is being so rich that I regularly forget more assets I own than you and everyone you'll ever know combined. The three things I saw and that come to mind are how stupidly rich they are, how disgustingly stingy and resentful they are, and how exceptionally paranoid they are that everyone is only interested in them for their money. Because in the end, that's all they really care about, and how they see people who aren't obscenely rich. These are people so incredibly rich that they have to hire an entire team of people, often from 20 to over 100 people, to manage their properties, art collections, yachts. Yes, in plural, and handle all aspects of their lives for them. For example, they live in multiple properties in different countries at different times of the year, and have teams of professionals in each region to prepare the living spaces, take the furniture out of storage, do the grocery shopping, buy tickets for entertainment events, prepare their cars or helicopters, etc. before their arrival. They possess a globally repugnant level of excessive material wealth to the point that they literally forget they own houses. Yes, in plural, art collections and cars, entire businesses, etc. On average, they will budget between $500,000 and $10 million annually just to keep track of their assets. The most common thing I saw, and that was completely appalling, is how often they refuse to pay for services they have received, simply by not paying the bill or initiating chargebacks for services. And keep in mind that this doesn't even happen if they are dissatisfied with the services received. They might do this because the outcome of an event they were organizing didn't turn out as expected, in ways that the service providers had no control over. Or sometimes just because they are being petty, like how dare the employees make a complaint about anything, or simply because they are stingy, so they don't pay the catering service, the event organizer, the band, or the DJ, and so on. Do they receive any service from anyone who doesn't demand payment up front? From any company that doesn't demand to be paid up front before providing the services? They are likely never paid because when it comes time to pay the bill, they don't have cash on hand, no card on them, and no cell signal to pay through an app, so they just send an invoice. Did you work for them on a major project that's about to see a massive return after several months of hard work? You'll be fired due to a senior management reorganization, totally unrelated to the fact that you just completed a project that generated $10 million. And why don't they just pay? For several reasons. They know that many of these service providers and workers live paycheck to paycheck and event to event and don't have the time or resources to pursue them legally. They have lawyers on retainer, which means having a lawyer under a work agreement. And well, apart from that, they are already paying and can fight anyone who pursues them legally, and they might as well make their lawyers work for their retainers. And because they reason that in the time between when they would have had to pay and when or if they are ever legally forced to pay, they can take those $50,000 or $500,000 or $5 million and use it to make even more money than it costs to fight a lawsuit, or even just pay the person what they are owed. Of course, they have a team of people to handle this for them and their families, so they never have to deal with the stress of their pettiness or face any consequences that might significantly impact their lives. Deaths. Lastly, the absolutely uncontrolled level of paranoia in which they exist is surprisingly sad and pathetic. They can and will conduct deep and highly illegal background checks on people that reveal information that even the lead doesn't have about a person. They will never trust anyone who isn't obscenely rich, and they will destroy any relationship they have with someone because of it. They don't trust anyone who isn't family, and even family can't be trusted because they fear they will use anything they share with the family to get them out of favor with the family leader. They will look for and find any and all possible reasons to dissociate from anyone who isn't stupidly rich, and believe that anyone who isn't obscenely rich doesn't deserve to live. And therefore, anything they do to screw that person over is absolutely justified. At the same time, they believe they have value outside of their wealth, while only valuing those with wealth and despising anyone without wealth to the point of passively and actively supporting the systematic extermination of the poor, other minorities, people who flee, disabled people, etc. All this while using the allure of their obscene wealth to manipulate people into doing their will. It's a bewildering and heartbreaking dichotomy that leaves a trail of ruined lives in its wake. Oh, and they are especially intolerant racists, who use coded language for any ethnic group that isn't their own and firmly believe that a just cleansing is coming that will eliminate from the world those who flee, other ethnic groups, and all the poor because they all deserve to die. Tax the rich until billionaires cease to exist. Wage theft should be punished as a criminal act, and the perpetrators should receive prison time for their crimes. I had a 1% boss, the richest man in my city. He took revenge on 2 scammers who tried to embezzle money from the company. The 2 scammers were sisters who infiltrated high positions in the company where I used to work. They were in positions in the company where I used to work. They were secretly plotting how to steal a large amount of money through an elaborate forgery scheme. However, they were discovered by the company's accountant. The younger sister threatened to use her gangster husband's connections to kidnap the big boss's children in retaliation for accusing them of stealing money from the company. Big mistake. The big boss showed up at the scammer's residence with his group. He summoned the entire family of the 2 scammers and made them kneel, heads bowed, to apologize. I'm talking about the grandmother and everyone down on the ground begging for forgiveness. I worked under the supervision of the younger sister for a while, and I know she is an absolutely proud woman, so full of her own ego, that this was the worst insult and must have been a more bitter punishment for her. The big boss called us workers to his office one by one to interrogate us and judge our position on the matter. I am loyal to him and the company because I am reasonable. He is a tough man, but has never treated me badly in any way. On the other hand, the older scammer sister stole from my salary, forged my signature on documents for pay advances, knowing that I was financially supporting my girlfriend at the time who was undergoing chemotherapy for cancer and couldn't work. So yes, I didn't like the other 2. In fact, I wanted to kill them. The big boss assured me he would handle things. Some other coworkers were loyal to the scammer sisters due to all the sweet talk, bribe gifts, and lavish dinners they gave them. They tried to use these loyal workers as a weapon by inciting an internal rebellion to cover their backs. The big boss gathered the entire team of lawyers and ended it quickly, and there was a major company reshuffle. After all the mess, the big boss kept the older scammer sister in the company for 2 years to work off all the money they had stolen that was spent on luxury houses, cars, and high-end clothing. Basically, her salary was garnished, and it was slave labor under close supervision until everything was paid off. They also liquidated everything they bought. The alternative was jail, but then no one would get their money back in that case. I quit shortly after the investigation ended and got my severance because I was so angry and exhausted with the whole matter. The younger sister completely disappeared during this time. I'm not exactly sure what happened to her. I'm sure she received appropriate punishment because someone I knew from the inside told me he absolutely hated her for threatening to harm his children and wanted revenge. I heard she ended up serving jail time, but that's just a rumor I was told. The big boss left the event behind, sold the company after a few more years, and opened a new construction and real estate company. He now owns large areas of land in commercial districts and several buildings and skyscrapers in more than 1 major city in this country. Basically, he's a billionaire at this point. For privacy reasons, I won't say where, but I'm sure you can guess it's in Asia. 7 years later, I hear that the 2 scammers were at it again, but this time they tried to get $10 million from a city government contract. They were canceled because someone in the city did a thorough background check and discovered that their fictitious company had all kinds of red flags. someone I worked with before also sued them for not paying on a work contract and won a legal battle. But again, the younger scammer sister threatened him in a text message as if she was going to get her gangster husband and his connections to punish my friend. The same old trick as before. I laughed so hard when I saw the text they sent, because my friend is a huge guy over 2 meters tall, a military veteran with combat experience in Afghanistan, and survived multiple gunshot wounds. And except that in this country we live in, guns are not allowed. Not even gangsters use them. So what did her supposed gangster husband do? Of course, nothing. One of their former employees now works for me, so I know how horrible the two scammers are. Something like two from the series Inventing Anna, trying to run fictitious companies to steal money. They put on airs of grandeur and opulence, but they are really robbing everyone who crosses their path. They have been blacklisted on all fronts. They even had the audacity to call me as if we were friends one day and pretend nothing happened. So I hope they rot in hell. As for the big boss, I've washed my hands of him and am indifferent to what he does. I still talk to his right-hand man from time to time, but other than that, I've moved on. For context, I used to work in catering as a summer job from high school through college for a large local restaurant in New England that specialized in lobsters. It was a cool job that I enjoyed a lot despite the heavy work and long hours. But given the cost of lobster and catering, some of the people who hired us were quite wealthy. After a few years working there, I had the opportunity to participate in smaller events, more intimate venues, more elegant events, richer clients, and of course, bigger tips. Anyone who went to these jobs had to be able to do everything from grilling or boiling all kinds of food, preparing sides, serving customers, loading equipment in and out of trucks, etc. One job I will never forget was at an extremely luxurious house on the coast during the 4th of July weekend, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, to cater to a wealthy couple who flew in to spend the weekend at their summer house with all their rich friends, more than 15 people. We always brought our own equipment and grills, but to give context, the kitchen in their house that I saw was huge, with a 16-burner stove, 6 ovens, and an island the size of Hawaii. Everything was modern and state-of-the-art, with furniture that looked like it came straight out of the most luxurious place. The backyard of the house had 3 levels, think of large tiered areas, with a lawn area, a pool, and a seating area that their personal assistant had set up with a lobster theme for the event, organized through an event design company, and she was eager to point this fact out. All of this connected by a staircase that went down to the beach. Honestly, it felt like the vibes from the Great Gatsby movie. The other guy and I set up at the entrance with our burners, grills, prep tables, etc., and I still remember that in the adjoining entrance, we could partially see an enormous collection of incredible cars, including a Ferrari, a Rolls-Royce, a Lotus Elise, and at least 5 others I can't recall. I sincerely think the location and the way these particular clients lived left me amazed. Nothing against them, I'm glad they can enjoy life, but it's another level of wealth that was interesting to peek into. At the end of the particular event I described, I still remember that we needed the client's signature on the contract to finalize it. And he was looking for money to tip us while searching through the kitchen drawers until he found a drawer full of $100 bills and handed them to us, me and the other guy, a couple each while spinning around, clearly having had a few drinks. Fortunately, his personal assistant was there to help him throughout the night, as he, his wife, and friends were definitely drunk from alcohol and who knows what else. That was a fun job, and many stories emerged from the numerous events I worked there, especially with the ultra-rich. And that's it for today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to share an anecdote or similar experience in the comments. Leave a like, and lastly, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. That's it.